Thanks to At Home for joining us this hour. In the summer of 1974, the special prosecutor who was investigating the Watergate scandal wrote a letter to Congress, to the Judiciary Committee in Congress. And that letter detailed what his investigation, what his prosecutors and investigators had turned up about criminal behavior by the president at the time, by President Richard Nixon. Now, by this point, by the summer of 1974, the president's campaign chairman, who had also been his attorney general, the president's White House chief of staff, a whole bunch of other senior White House personnel from the Nixon administration had already been indicted a few months earlier for very serious crimes. And in conjunction with that indictment, the grand jury had named President Nixon as a co-conspirator, even though he personally was not included as a defendant in the indictment. He was the unindicted co-conspirator. Now, the legal team working for President Nixon at the time raised a challenge to that. They basically challenged whether the information in the case, the evidence seen by the grand jury that produced that indictment, produced those allegations against the president's legal team questioned whether that evidence was actually sufficient to warrant something as radical as naming the serving president of the United States as part of a serious criminal conspiracy. And so when the president's legal team raised that objection, this kind of momentous thing happened at the height of the summer in 1974. Because the Judiciary Committee in Congress, chairman of the Judiciary Committee, wrote to the Watergate special prosecutor, the prosecutor who had brought that indictment, and said, basically, hey, you obtained this indictment, you presented evidence to the grand jury sufficient to warrant this indictment. If, in fact, that evidence was also sufficient to warrant naming the president as a co-conspirator in these crimes, well, let's hear it. What is that evidence? What is it that you found about President Richard Nixon that justified this allegation that he was in on all of these crimes too? And the special prosecutor for Watergate responded, Leon Jaworski, basically said, okay, here you go, dear Mr. Chairman, happy to. You send us a subpoena, we will happily send you over our summary of evidence pertaining to President Nixon's conduct in the Watergate matter. And the prosecutor, Leon Jaworski, then produced page after page after page after page of detailed allegations that Nixon had, in fact, committed tons of crimes, including lots of criminal obstruction of justice. Quote, beginning no later than March 21st, 1973, the president joined an ongoing criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice, to obstruct a criminal investigation, and to commit perjury, which included making and causing to be made false statements and declarations, making offers of clemency and leniency, and obtaining information from the Justice Department to thwart its investigation. For example, there is evidence that the president conspired with others to defraud the United States and to commit violations of certain federal criminal laws, to wit, obstruction of justice, which included paying of funds and offers of clemency and other benefits in order to influence the testimony of witnesses, making and facilitating the making of false statements and declarations, obtaining information about the ongoing investigation from the Justice Department for the purpose of diverting or thwarting the investigation. Also, perjury, including the president's direct and personal efforts to encourage and facilitate the giving of misleading and false testimony by aides. Also, bribery, by directly and indirectly offering something of value, including clemency and or a pardon, with the intent to influence testimony before grand juries, courts, and congressional committees. Also obstruction of a congressional committee, also obstruction of a criminal investigation. It goes on and on and on and on and on. Quote, there is ample evidence to demonstrate that President Nixon took personal and affirmative direct action to further the conspiracy outlined above. These allegations against Nixon from 1974 and the evidence that supported these allegations against Nixon, they've gotten a lot of attention this year, right? And that's in part because a whole bunch of this stuff about Nixon has just been unsealed, just made available to the public for the first time, so there's historical interest. But honestly, what is driving a lot of that historical interest, what's been driving the effort to get a bunch of this stuff unsealed now, is the almost uncannily parallel experience we are having right now in our lifetimes when it comes to our current president, right? I mean, even just looking at this This one exchange of information between the Judiciary Committee and the Watergate prosecutor in 74. Just pull out a couple of those bullet points for a second. See if any of these things ring a bell, right? Making and facilitating the making of false statements and declarations about the investigation. Offers of clemency to influence the testimony of witnesses. Obtaining information about the ongoing investigation for the purpose of diverting or thwarting that investigation. Yeah, I mean, these could be captions for a picture book tour of the Nixon administration or the Trump administration, either way. I mean, when it came to Nixon, it turned out at the time, and we can now see more clearly than ever, 45 years down the line, it turned out there were mountains of this stuff, this evidence of Nixon's criminal behavior, mountains of this stuff that was turned up by federal prosecutors and investigators. Now, in our lifetime, as yet, we know very little about what federal prosecutors and federal investigators have about our current president. But nevertheless, we've still got our own mountain of reporting and evidence about an even bigger number of alleged instances of obstruction by the president. Just stuff turned up by investigative reporting and in some cases just admitted to by the president and other senior figures themselves, or just committed openly out in public out loud. I mean, to the point where it has sometimes been squirmingly awkward for those involved.
Have you talked about this issue with Admiral Rogers?
That is something that I would like to withhold that question at this particular point in time.
That excruciatingly pregnant 9-second long pause brought to you by the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats. That was the day after NBC News reported that the president had asked him and also the head of the National Security Agency at the time, head of the NSA, Admiral Mike Rogers. NBC reported that the president had asked them both to make public statements saying that they and their agencies knew that President Trump and his campaign hadn't colluded with Russia. So the Russia investigation was way off base. The day before that 9-second pause from Director Coats in Congress, NBC had reported that not only had President Trump directed him as the Director of National Intelligence and also the head of the NSA to make those public statements to undermine the Russia investigation, but also the two of them, head of the NSA, head of the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, the two of them had talked to each other about that request from the president, sort of compared notes after the president had approached them both.
I'll ask both of you the same question. Why are you not answering these questions? Is there an invocation by the President of the United States of executive privilege? Is there or not?
Not that I'm aware of.
Then why are you not answering our
questions? Because I feel it is
questions?
inappropriate, Senator.
What you feel isn't relevant, Admiral. What you feel isn't the answer. The answer is, why are you not answering the questions? Is it an invocation of executive privilege? If there is, then let's know about it. If there isn't, answer the questions.
I stand by the comments I've made. I'm not interested in repeating myself, sir. And I don't mean that in a contentious way.
Well, I do mean it in a contentious way. I don't understand why you're not answering our questions. You can't. When you were confirmed before the Armed Services Committee, you took an oath. Do you solemnly swear to give the committee the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth? So help you God. You answered yes to that.
And I've also answered that those conversations were classified, and it is not appropriate in an open forum to discuss those classified conversations.
What is classified about a conversation involving whether or not you should intervene in the FBI investigation?
Sir, I stand by my previous comments.
Mr. Coates, same series of questions. What's the basis for your refusal to answer these questions today?
The basis is what I've previously explained. I do not believe it is appropriate for me to
What's the basis? I'm not satisfied with I do not believe it is appropriate or I do not feel I should answer. I want to understand a legal basis. You swore that oath to tell us the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and today you are refusing to do so. What is the legal basis for your refusal to testify to this committee?
I'm not sure I have a legal basis.
So already this stuff is out there, right? That's why these senators are able to ask these questions. In this case, Senator Angus King of Maine, right? Those two intelligence agency chiefs are on the hot seat there because of public reports that these senior intelligence officials, director of national intelligence, head of the NSA, the president asked them to make statements exonerating the president in the Russia investigation. In fact, the day before that exchange with Angus King, the Washington Post reported that the president had asked not only for these public exonerating statements, the president had asked the director of national intelligence to personally intervene with the FBI to tell the FBI to stop its investigation on the Russia matter, including specifically their investigation into the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn. Right, some of the most powerful obstruction evidence against Nixon from the 70s, some of the evidence against Nixon that is still the most widely remembered stuff all these decades later, because it made it into the impeachment articles against him. Some of the most widely remembered parts of his obstruction effort were when he tried to block the FBI investigation into him by using the intelligence agencies, by using the CIA, telling the FBI there was stuff they couldn't look into because those were CIA matters, trying to enlist the CIA in an effort to cover up what he had done and to stop the FBI investigation that was going to expose him. When it comes to President Trump apparently trying the same thing, not only did he reportedly ask the heads of 2 intelligence agencies to help him out when it came to public perceptions of the Russia investigation, he specifically requested that they should intervene with the FBI, tell the FBI to back off. And according to the Washington Post, that request was made while another senior official was in the room and witnessed it. A man named Mike Pompeo, who at the time of this alleged incident, he was the head of the CIA. He's since gone on to be Secretary of State. Here's how he has answered questions about what he saw, what he heard the day that he was in the room in the White House when he was the supposed witness to the president trying to enlist the director of national intelligence to kibosh the investigation into his campaign as a complete historical mirror to what Nixon got busted for.
So, Director, this account strongly suggests that the president asked you and Director Coates to interfere with then FBI Director Comey's investigations into the Trump campaign's contacts with Russia. What did President Trump say to you and Director Coates in that meeting?
Senator, I'm not going to talk about the conversations the president I had.
Did he ask you to do anything as it relates to that investigation?
Senator, I don't recall. I don't recall what he asked me that day.
Why would something like that even stand out? You know, the president in the Oval Office committing blatant obstruction of justice when it's just you and the director of national intelligence and the president in the room. The president has asked everybody else to leave, and then he makes this request. Will you please shut off the investigation into me? Will you please intervene with the FBI to make them stop investigating me? Why would you even remember whether or not that happened in that moment? That kind of thing, what? It happens all the time, right? Why would you recall? Why would that stand? You know, actually, maybe it does happen all the time. I mean, just look at where we are now. Look at the height to which we have risen. With Nixon, it was a revelation at the end. All the stuff we learned that he had done, all the stuff that prosecutors and investigators collected evidence of in terms of his criminal behavior. With President Trump, it has been a mountain that has been built up in public, stone by stone, from the very beginning, from the very start of his presidency. I mean, President Trump has not credibly denied any of this. He asked FBI Director James Comey to lay off the FBI investigation into Michael Flynn as it pertained to Russia. He fired James Comey as the head of the FBI after Comey refused to do that, and after Comey refused to make exonerating public statements about the president. The president also told Attorney General Jeff Sessions, directed him, that he shouldn't follow the professional ethics advice of the Justice Department, shouldn't follow Justice Department rules. He should defy that advice and those rules and not recuse himself from overseeing the Russia investigation because the president believed that caused him to lose control of the Russia investigation. The president also told then Attorney General Jeff Sessions out loud in public, in writing, that he needed to stop the Russia investigation, quote, right now. One of the president's lawyers quickly tried to explain that away by saying, it's not a call to action. To be clear, the exact quote by the president out loud in public in writing was this, quote, Attorney General Jeff Sessions should stop this rigged witch hunt right now. That's not a call to action. It was like a fortune cookie thing, or he copied down from somewhere. We don't know what he meant. It's ambiguous. I mean, just today, out loud, online, the president posted an image suggesting that the deputy attorney general, who until recently oversaw the Russia investigation, he should be jailed and tried for treason. The president was asked just tonight, quote, "Why do you think Rod Rosenstein belongs behind bars?" The president responded, quote, "He should have never picked a special counsel." So the president just saying out loud tonight that a top Justice Department official should be jailed and charged with a crime for which the penalty is capital punishment, for having appointed a special counsel in the Russia investigation, in that ongoing investigation. The president in June of last year told his White House counsel to fire the special counsel leading the Russia investigation. The president in December did the same thing again. The president on August 9th of last year placed a phone call from his golf club in New Jersey to the majority leader in the Senate, Republican Senator Mitch McConnell, and excoriated McConnell for, quote, refusing to protect him, meaning refusing to protect the president, from investigations of Russian interference in the 2016 election. Multiple Republicans were then briefed on that conversation, in which the president called the Senate majority leader. Their accounts then made their way into the New York Times. It was never even half-heartedly denied by the president. Even more specifically than that, the president repeatedly directed not only Mitch McConnell, but also another Republican in Senate leadership, Senator Roy Blunt of Missouri, and Senator Richard Burr, the chair of the Intelligence Committee, that they should stop the Senate Intelligence Committee investigation into Russian interference. Again, this isn't contested by anybody involved. Senator Burr confirmed in an interview to the New York Times that, yeah, actually the president did contact him and tell him to end the Russia investigation in the Senate. The president has also personally participated in concocting false public statements about key issues that are a part of the investigation, including the false statement he drafted in the name of his eldest son, claiming that a meeting with Russians to obtain damaging information about Hillary Clinton was really a meeting about Russian adoptions. And I know you're like, oh, Maddo, that's cute. The newsflash that the president lied about a thing isn't news anymore. I know. I can hear you through the TV. Yeah, that may be so. The president lies. It's like, dog bites man. It may be so that that's no longer news. God rest our souls for that. But in the context of a key matter that is actively under criminal investigation, concocting a false public statement to mislead investigators about the nature of that incident, that isn't just your run-of-the-mill presidential lie. Legally, that could be a problem. I mean, go back to 74. Go back to the summer of 74 for what Nixon got in trouble with, right? The president joined an ongoing criminal conspiracy to obstruct justice, obstruct a criminal investigation, and commit perjury, including making and causing to be made false statements and declarations. I mean, we have already seen out in public open source reporting that the president's Russia lawyers went privately to two crucial figures in the ongoing investigation, Mike Flynn and Paul Manafort, and talked with their lawyers about them potentially receiving pardons from the president. This at a time when both men were already cooperating with or considering cooperating with federal prosecutors in their investigation of the president. Just today, in an interview, the president publicly floated the idea of a pardon for his campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. Why would I take that off the table? This while Manafort is locked in a struggle with prosecutors about his cooperation, and with the president's lawyers now proudly bragging to the New York Times as of last night that while Manafort was supposedly cooperating with them, they in fact were actually using him as a source of intel to find out on behalf of the president what was going on inside the special counsel's office, what Mueller's prosecutors were asking about, what they were focusing on. And, we've heard some other elements of the president's behavior that sound like this before. It was reported in March by the New York Times that the president had asked a couple of other key witnesses who had spent a lot of time with Mueller's prosecutors, Don McGahn, then the White House counsel, and Reince Priebus, former White House chief of staff. The New York Times reported this spring that President Trump asked both of them detailed questions about their interactions with the special counsel in order to try to glean information from them about the status of the investigation, talking to witnesses about their testimony to the special prosecutor. But now, with this news about Manafort, now it's a little different, because now the president is apparently doing that with a convicted felon to whom he is also openly dangling a pardon. I mean, if you had been sealed in a vault for the last 2 years, and you came out today and somebody handed you that litany of basically uncontested, detailed reporting and evidence about the president's efforts to obstruct this serious ongoing criminal investigation into himself and his administration and his campaign, you would think you were reading a bombshell indictment, right? That signaled the end of a presidency, or at least the middle of impeachment proceedings, right? But instead, that's just the public record. It just piled up piece by piece, week after week, month after month, into what has ended up being a really big mountain of evidence just on the issue of obstruction of justice. You don't really realize how big the mountain is until you look around and realize how far down the ground is. But wow, we're really way up here now. On the day after the midterm election, when the president fired Attorney General Jeff Sessions and installed Matt Whitaker in his place, he then admitted almost instantly in an interview with the Daily Caller that he had put Matt Whitaker there because of the Russia investigation. There arose immediate concerns that Whitaker would shut down the Mueller investigation from his perch at the Justice Department. It was just a question of when and how much we would know about it. Shortly thereafter, somebody really interesting ran a really interesting flag up the proverbial flagpole. The recently departed General Counsel of the FBI, James Baker, published a piece at Lawfare, which drew attention to a really specific part of the history and the legal precedent of presidential criminal misbehavior here. It was specifically about what Nixon did. Part of Nixon's criminal history in Watergate is that he did use contact with the Justice Department to spy on the investigation into him. Part of the way Nixon did that was his frequent contacts with the man who was then the head of the criminal division at the Justice Department. In his meetings with Henry Peterson, his repeated calls with Peterson, he extracted key information about what was going on in Watergate, what was going on with key witnesses before the grand jury. And Nixon did that so he and his legal team could strategize around it. Right now, of course, there are major concerns about whether or not Matt Whitaker is playing that role for President Trump. It was therefore very provocative for James Baker, the recently departed FBI General Counsel, to publish that piece in Lawfare right after Matt Whitaker was named, right? This was Baker pointing out explicitly and without subtlety that, you know, when Nixon used a Justice Department official as a back channel of information and intel about the investigation that targeted him, that was treated as a bluntly impeachable offense for that president. Right? So this is a very live issue, whether Matt Whitaker right now is back channeling information about the investigation to Trump. How we'll find out about it if that's happening, who will collect evidence of that if it is happening, who will prosecute it or otherwise try to bring about accountability for that if it is proven, which is made all the more complicated, all the more dire, and all the more urgent by the prospect that Matt Whitaker may not just be providing intelligence about the investigation to the White House, he may be actively throttling the investigation secretly right now from inside the Justice Department. And how would we know about that? On top of that, within the last 24 hours, we now have new evidence that the president, definitely, this is confirmed, uncontested, he has another ongoing source of information from inside the Mueller investigation, namely his former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort. This revelation that his former campaign chairman, who was supposedly cooperating, instead has been effectively functioning as a spy for Trump's defense inside the prosecution. That is obviously blowing up the criminal case that involves Paul Manafort. But it also means the president and his legal team are now admitting out loud in public that they are colluding with a convicted felon to surreptitiously gain intelligence on the prosecution, basically in order to discredit and outmaneuver those prosecutors who are investigating the president. They are just openly admitting it, right? Which would be a massive expose if it were unveiled as an expose. As it is, it's just piled one more rock on top of the mountain because they're talking about it openly. It does also mean, though, that for once, we might actually be in truly, truly legally unprecedented territory, right? I mean, yeah, Nixon got a back channel into the Justice Department. We know a little bit about what Nixon did. Nixon didn't use a convicted felon in the middle of his criminal case as his back channel. Right? I mean, we've now, between what we learned in the 70s and what was unsealed this year about Nixon, we've now got all the evidence about what Nixon did, and it's staggering. But even Nixon never did anything like this. And so if this is all happening in plain sight right now, how does it get fixed? And by whom? And what are the biggest risks for all of us now in terms of whether or not people will be held accountable for what they've done in plain sight? That's next. Hold on.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.